Welcome to Shaped by Faith with your host, Theresa Rowe. To find out more about Shaped by Faith and Theresa Rowe, please visit shapedbyfaith.com or visit the YouTube channel, Facebook, or Instagram. And now, here is Theresa Rowe.
Welcome to Shaped by Faith. We shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. My guest is Sharon Wilharm. She's a Christian speaker, Bible teacher, radio podcast host, and former Christian filmmaker. Sharon, you lived an interesting life. You're living one. You have done a lot that God has allowed you to do. Sharon has enjoyed a lifelong fascination with women of the Bible. We're going to talk about that today. And she loves applying the biblical stories to modern situations. And we all need that. We all need that insight. She's especially enjoying delving into, I know you delved into lesser known women in your last season and discovering the truths for women of today. But now you're in your third season and you're host of All God's Women podcast. It's an internationally syndicated radio show, and she's working her way through the Bible one woman at a time, bringing to light the stories of ancient women and applying them to modern day living. Thanks for being on Shaped by Faith, Sharon. I'm so glad you're with me today.
Well, thank you, Theresa. I am excited to be chatting with you.
Well, I'm excited when, you learn something that you don't know. You don't know until you know it. And I love the way, we were talking before we recorded how you find a woman in the Bible, and it may be a paragraph, it may be a longer story or a few sentences, and you really unfold that. And you give great insight, biblical perspective and insight into that. And I love that. It makes me want to do the same thing. So thank you so much. I would love for you to give us your background and what you were doing before starting your podcast, All God's Women.
Well, let's see. I started off as a teacher. I was a homeschool mom. I was a filmmaker. And then when we released our last movie in 2018, I was looking for something to do to be involved in our local church. And I ended up taking over as women's ministry director, which led me to starting a home Bible study about Proverbs 31 woman, which led into a Women of the Bible, which led into the All God's Women podcast.
Wow. Okay. So you have done a lot. You've got a lot of, background about, your homeschooling, your filmmaking, your studying the Bible. And so you have got a lot to bring to the table. So I want to ask you, so I know you were teaching the Bible study, but is that what got you interested in studying the women of the Bible and unfolding one at a time, or how did that happen?
Well, I have always loved women of the Bible. And, I remember even growing up, I would read the story of Noah and I would always be wondering, well, think about Mrs. Noah, what she had to go through. And I'm thinking about those daughters and, what on earth? And so I just feel this special connection with the women because, I'm reading about these men and their lives are so different than mine. And then I read the women and I'm like, oh, these women are just like me. They're going through the same things. And so it was funny because if you had asked me 5 years ago about being a Bible teacher, I would be like, I will do anything in the world, but I cannot be a Bible teacher. I don't, I have no qualifications. I have nothing. But when I took over as women's ministry director, I'm like, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do a Bible study. And
True.
The only thing I knew to do was Proverbs 31 because it was very familiar to me and I had, I felt comfortable with it. And so what I did is each session, we would take a verse of Proverbs 31 and then I would take a woman of the Bible and I would show how she illustrated that particular principle.
Oh, that's awesome.
It just it was my easy way to do.
That's not easy, Sharon. That's not easy at all. You have to study.
Well,
you have to know the women in the Bible.
But see, I was cheating in the beginning because I would only do the ones that I had books about that told me about these women.
Right. That's not really cheating. You're just sharing information, right?
I am.
And that was getting your feet wet. And look what you're doing now. You're in your third season of All God's Women. And so how many women are in each season? Does it vary? Like
It varies because there's a lot more women in the Old Testament than the New Testament.
Right. Okay. So what topics did you start with when you first started? And by the way, tell us how you got into, podcasting and a radio show. That's interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm like the least techie person in the world. And so literally, I didn't even know exactly what a podcast was until right before I started mine. I would do interviews as a filmmaker on podcast, and I didn't know how to listen to them because
what?
I thought that podcasts were just something that you listen to on your phone. And like, I don't do things on my phone. Like I talk on the phone and I barely text. And I'm like, I'm not taking this phone and listening to something. So podcasts were like this foreign world to me. And then I discovered that you could listen to them on your computer. And I am a laptop computer person. So I was like, wow, podcast. And then I thought they were only interview. And I wasn't really interested because I started in 2013 a blog where I would interview people from the Christian film industry. So I had been interviewing for years and I was burned out on that. So I had no interest in doing a podcast because I didn't feel like interviewing people. And then when I discovered that you could do storytelling, a solo storytelling, I was like, this is a thing. And so then I was like, okay, I want to do a podcast and I only know one thing, and that's women in the Bible. So I guess that's what I'm going to do. And the timing was really cool because my daughter and her family, her husband is a pastor and he had just got a job at a church in Kentucky, which is 4.5 hours away from us. And so I knew I was going to be very lonely because I was used to having them right down the street and they had just had a baby. So I was like, I need something to entertain me. And about the time I was getting ready to start and they were getting ready to move, COVID hit.
Oh, okay.
And so I started my podcast at the end of March in 2020.
Okay. Well, look at you. I mean, God had placed that in you the whole time. I mean, you are a gifted storyteller. I think that's so funny, though, when you were explaining the podcast. For me, it was a blog. And I mean, this was before I was even on the computer on a regular basis. A few people in the Christian industry asked me to blog, and I was too embarrassed to even ask them, what is a blog? I ignored their emails. And, about a year later, I could hit myself in the head. I'm like, Theresa, you know what? That was my pride. I should have found out, but I didn't. I'm like, I don't, what is a blog? I mean, I think about it now and I'm like, it's no big deal. But for something we don't know, there's a little fear and a little anxiousness and missed opportunities. But hey, here we are today.
It is God's timing.
That's it. You're right. You're right. Everything is in his timing. And we go through things to teach us, right? And to mold and shape us. So it's okay. It's okay. I'm telling myself it's okay. Yeah. So let's just get into it. And then we're going to take a break in about 1.5 minutes. But tell us about your first season of All God's Women and, some of the topics in that first season.
Well, right before I started the podcast, I had met a woman who was talking about how important Bible study was and how we needed to study it chronologically so that everything was in perspective. And that really hit me. And so when I started working on the podcast, I was like, okay, I need to go in order. It's not like I was covering the whole Bible, but at the same time, I was like, this is a good basis just to go through from the beginning until the end. And it'll all make sense because it'll be in order. And I was doing just like I'd been doing with my Bible study at home. I was picking the main women, the ones that I had books that I could look up on them and had a lot of information. And then a few months into my podcast, I ended up joining Christian Podcast Community, which is a podcast network. And as he was interviewing me about that, he said, I like the concept. I like your podcast. But what happens when you run out of women? And I was like, oh, I haven't thought about that. And so I had to kind of revamp and realize that I was going to have to do a bunch of obscure women and I was going to have to research them myself. And that was a major turning point and really the best thing because those have become my favorite episodes.
We do so well with them. Sharon, let's take a real quick break right here and we'll be right back with more Shaped by Faith. Everyone stay tuned. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith. We shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. Sharon Wilharm, Christian speaker, Bible teacher, radio podcast host, former Christian filmmaker. I mean, the list goes on and on, Sharon. You were a homeschooler, you were a you're a women's director, Bible study teacher, a teacher, and now you're a podcaster, and you're a very good podcaster because I listen to them. Before we get into this, I want you to tell people where they can find your podcast.
Okay, it is All God's Women, and you can go to allgodswomen.com to get to my website where you can listen directly on the website if you want, if you're not a techie person. Or if you go to any of the podcast apps, I'm there. And I'm also on pray.com if you go there, or Edify, which is also an app with Christian podcast. And so pretty much wherever you can listen to a podcast, you should be able to listen to me.
Okay. So who are some of the women in the Bible that made an impact on you and some of their stories?
So I talked about how it was the obscure women that I was kind of scared of. And also it was those women, like I started off, I wanted to do the women that had the sweet stories, the kind of the happy ever after that we, made us feel good inside. And I would kind of skip over the sad stories or the confusing stories, the stories that didn't make sense to me. But then when I realized I was going to run out of women and I needed to cover them, I started okay, I don't understand this story, so I'm going to read it and I'm going to study it until it makes sense. And those are the ones that have ended up really impacting me. Like Rizpah, who I had never heard of, wasn't in any way familiar with. But
how do you say that again, Sharon?
Rizpah, Rizpah.
Wow. Okay.
And she was one of Saul's concubines. Okay. And she was a political pawn because when Saul died and there was the one guy who was taking over, accused the military leader of sleeping with her. And then because of that, he ended up showing his support to David. And so it was kind of instrumental in that. But then later on, when David was king and there was a famine for 3 years, and David took it to the Lord and said, "Why is there famine?" And the Lord said it's because of Saul's bloodthirstiness that he had been killing these Gibeonites, even though they had a peace treaty with them. Mm-hmm. And so rather than just saying to God, okay, how can I make this right? He went to the Gibeonites and said, how can I make this right? And they said, we would like you to hang 5 of Saul's descendants. And he said, okay. So he took her 2 sons and then 3 of Saul's grandsons and allowed the Gibeonites to hang them.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
And so Rizpah, had to watch her only 2 sons being killed for something that they didn't do. And so they were hung on the crosses there. And, the law was that when somebody was put to death, you buried them that day and gave them a proper burial. Well, for whatever reason, they didn't. They forgot about them. And so Rizpah camped up on that hill, and it ended up being 5 months before they buried those bodies. And so for 5 months, she stayed there at the foot of that hill, and she would chase away birds in the daytime and wild animals at night. And she sat on her sackcloth and just remained faithful until eventually word got to David and they ended up burying them. And then at that point, rain came down.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that an amazing story?
All right, let me ask you this. Okay, so she had to stay. She stayed at the foot of the hill for 5 months. Okay, was she not allowed to bury them? I mean, I'm intrigued now. Were women not allowed to bury their dead?
I don't know that she could have physically buried them because they were hung up on a tree, and right. She's just a woman, and I don't know that she could have gotten them down, and she probably wouldn't have been allowed. I don't know. I just know that she was faithful on that hill.
Wow.
And why didn't anybody else do anything? Like
Where
you know
are
how
her friends? Where were they?
exactly?
Wow.
I don't know.
That is interesting. No, you don't hear about Rizpah. Well, thank you for
Mm-mm.
sharing that. I mean, that is very interesting. Okay, so is she your favorite, or do you have a favorite woman of the Bible?
Well, I like a lot of them. It's usually whoever I'm studying at the moment. I really like,
Mhm.
but the one I connect with the most is Naomi.
Okay.
Because I love that she spends her life basically taking care of other people. Like she's always watching out for everybody else. But then there comes a point that she just gets bitter and
Mhm.
she's just kind of fed up because she's done all this and what has it got her? And so she's just angry at God and she's convinced that, it's just a horrible life after this. Her life is over. It's all downhill. As my grandfather said one time to us, life is miserable and it only gets worse. And I think that she felt that way. But
Mhm.
then God had this amazing future for her that she could not have foreseen, that was so much better than anything she could have expected. And I just feel like the older I get, the more opportunities God gives me.
Mhm.
And I'm just so blessed by that because periodically I'll think, I'm just getting old and all the best things are behind me. And then I think, no, God is opening up all kinds of new doors, things that I could not have expected in my younger years. So I'm so thankful that God understands our bitterness, when we get discouraged.
Yes.
And he's like, it's okay, hold on. I got this.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you explained Naomi. Everyone can relate to her at some point in their life, or like right now in the season that we're in, like God's what is going on here? Do you see what's going on here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so you're in season 3, is that correct?
Correct. We started in January.
Okay, so tell us about season 3, what we can expect when we listen.
Okay, well, I finally made it through all the women of the Bible. It had to happen eventually.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I had to figure out now, what do I do? And I could have just started back at the beginning, but I wanted to do something a little more interesting. And so I decided to break it up into thematic. Each month would be a particular theme of women. And I also changed it in the past. My radio show would be just whatever women, like they weren't connected because I'd started the beginning with my radio show and I had my podcast. And so I'm like, okay, now they're all going to be connected and doing the same women. And so in January, I kicked that off with Worn Out Women.
That's a good one.
Well, when I was planning it in the fall, it seemed good because I was thinking about how over the holidays, women are running around and they're ragged and tired and Christmas is over and everybody is just like, oh, I just need a break.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I was thinking it. But then December, we ended up getting COVID. And for 3 weeks, I just sat we just sat on the couch.
It's no fun.
Felt horrible.
No fun.
And so I really began, Worn Out Women took on a new perspective for me.
Mm-hmm. I bet it did.
And I was like, that is pretty cool timing that God was like, okay, I've got this plan. Luckily, I had planned ahead because there's no way I could have written those during December. I'm so glad God had pushed me in November going, you need to get this done. You need to be ready. And I was like, why?
And he does that, doesn't he?
Yes.
So listen to him when he says, do it now. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What about February? What's your theme?
Oh, yes. So we're winding down January. February is love lessons from the Bible. And again, I'm not doing the predictable. Everybody thinks of Sarah and Abraham and Rebecca and Isaac and Rachel, but I am doing the marriages that I feel like we can really learn from. And so we're doing Priscilla and Elizabeth and Abigail. And then another one of those that is, I skipped before, but I'm coming back to is Gomer. She's one of those I had avoided because her story made me uncomfortable.
Yes.
But as I have been, I watched Redeeming Love, the movie, and it got me thinking, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to keep reading this until I get it.
Oh, wasn't that storyline amazing? Redeeming Love. I mean, just incredible.
It was, but what it did is it made me want to read in the Bible and see what exactly do we know about Gomer and Hosea? It made me want to research.
Right. No, that's good. And God gave you that ability, Sharon, actually to do that, because not everyone's like you, right? Just like we're all different and unique, but I'm glad you're you and that you're teaching us and that we can actually listen to you over the podcast. Okay, we need to take one more break and then we'll come back. And so everyone stay tuned for more Shaped by Faith. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith. And my guest today is Sharon Wilharm. And Sharon, I am just, when you're telling the story, you are very gifted in doing that, obviously, because it's just compelling. And I want to hear more from you. I absolutely do. So everyone needs to listen to your podcast, and we can learn a lot from the wisdom that you lay out there and unfold. You're also working on Women of Prayer, a Bible study book based on your podcast. So why don't you tell us about that?
Well, the coolest thing about this book is that 28 years ago, I submitted a book to a publisher and it wasn't accepted. They liked it. They held it for a year. It wasn't published. And I sent it to another publisher. They liked it. They held it for a while and they didn't publish it. For 28 years, I have been submitting books for publication. All different manuscripts, all kinds of different books, all kinds of publishers. And each time God has said no. Mm-hmm. And now, finally, God has said yes. And I have a contract for Women of Prayer. And I'm so excited because it is a Bible study, the one kind of book I thought I would never write. And I'm just so excited about it because prayer and women of the Bible are my two things that I'm so passionate about. And so now I get to combine those and teach women how to study the Bible, because it's not a Bible study where I'm going to walk you through everything. It's how I'm going to show women, if you want to study the Bible on your own, here are the things that I do and you can do it. And in the process, you're going to learn about God and you're going to learn about prayer.
Oh, that's awesome. When is it being published?
It will be sometime in 2023, but I don't know a date yet. A lot of it depends on when I finish the book.
Sure. Well, I'm excited for you. I mean, that's awesome news, and praise God for that. I mean, that is a God thing. Okay, so you host Women of Prayer events also and retreats. So what are these like, and what can women expect from attending one of them?
Well, I started these when I was doing women's ministry at our church. That was like one of the first things when I took over. I just felt like we need to have a prayer retreat. And I didn't even know what a prayer retreat was. Like I had never been to one.
Right.
And I really couldn't find anything online like what a prayer retreat was. But I'm like, you know what? We're just going to study about prayer. We're going to go to this camp and we're going to study about prayer. And that's what we did. And then I did another one. And by the second one, I was like, okay, we're going to take my Women of Prayer, my Women of the Bible, because that's what I know. And I tied it all in. And so then now I'm taking it other places and I'm really excited about it. I can do Women of Prayer, like retreats, other places, but what I've got lined up now is like 1 day event or even a half day event. And so depending on the church, how much they want, there's a world of content there that I can talk about Women of Prayer. And so it's just a matter of, what the church wants and how I give it to them.
So they just get a hold of you, right? And how do they get a hold of you, Sharon?
They can go to my website. If they go to allgodswomen.com, they'll get there, or they can go to SharonWilharm.com. And you can look under speaker or you can look under contact. I think on the home page, there's all kinds of places where it says where you can contact me.
Okay. So let's talk about the Women of Focus conference that's coming up on May the 7th, and tell us about that and where it's going to take place.
Okay. It is taking place May 7th. Hopefully it is happening this time. We originally scheduled it for September of 2020, rescheduled it for September of 2021. And God just said, you know what? It's not time yet. We'll do it in May of 2022. So that's what we're doing at our church in Springfield, Tennessee, which is north of Nashville. And I'm really excited about it. I feel peace. I know that this is when God wanted us to have it. And it's just going to be an amazing time. Our theme is light in the darkness. And I think it's something we can all relate to because there's so much darkness.
Absolutely.
And we just need a week, a time of looking at the light.
Mm-hmm. And, it's good for women to gather together. I think we've been I mean, the last 2 years, like you mentioned, the conference has been rescheduled so many times. And I know with me, it has been as well with different conferences. And it's time to gather together and to join our forces together and to encourage one another. I mean, we need that. Women need that. I know men do as well. But women, we talk more anyway. So we need to be gathered together. Sharon, our time is almost out, and I know we could continue just talking, but I would love for you to close the show and pray as the Lord leads you.
Lord God, I just love you so much. And I thank you for the way that you work in our lives, the way you take things from our past and just plant seeds. And sometimes we get discouraged because we can't see what's going to pop up out of that seed. But Lord, you know, and you are constantly watering us and filling us with the fertilizer and everything we need so that when the time is right, we can bloom and just serve you in the way that you designed us to be. And I thank you for all the opportunities that you are providing, though so many things are canceled and rescheduled, Lord. Still, you provide us with ways to connect with one another. And I just thank you for the blessing of that. And I just ask that you be with us in the year to come and just allow it to be a time where we can truly find you and get to know you in a special way and to share your love to those around us. In Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Sharon, and I look forward to being at that conference with you in May. And God's going to do some great things. But thank you, my friend, so much for being a guest today on Shaped by Faith.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day.
Thank you for listening to Shaped by Faith with Theresa Rowe. Remember to visit shapedbyfaith.com to find out more about workouts, the TV show, podcasts, blogs, Shaped by Faith products, and much more.